Red wine dripped from Alexandra Wright's perfectly pressed white blazer as laughter echoed through the marble ballroom. The liquid splattered across her face, her hair pooling on the polished floor beneath her expensive heels. 20-year-old Brandon Whitmore stood above her, an empty crystal glass dangling from his fingers, smirking like he'd just won a game. His parents, Richard and Victoria Whitmore, weren't rushing to apologize. They were laughing. Actually laughing. Their son had just humiliated one of the most powerful CEOs in America, and they thought it was funny. But what the Whitmores didn't know, what they couldn't possibly know in that moment, was that the woman standing before them, wine soaking into her designer clothes, held their entire future in her hands. And she was about to let it slip right through her fingers. 4 months earlier, Alexandra Wright sat in her corner office on the 47th floor of Wright Technologies, staring at a contract that would change everything. $650 million. The number glowed on her computer screen like a promise. The Whitmore family wanted to merge their struggling tech manufacturing company with her empire. They needed her, desperately. Their factories were outdated, their patents were expiring, and their investors were getting nervous. Without this deal, industry experts whispered, the Whitmore company wouldn't survive another 2 years. Alexandra had built Wright Technologies from nothing. 15 years ago, she was a single mother working 2 jobs, teaching herself to code after her daughter fell asleep, dreaming of something bigger. Now she employed over 10,000 people. Her software ran in hospitals, schools, and government buildings across the country. She'd earned every inch of her success through late nights, rejected pitches, and people who underestimated her because of the color of her skin. The Whitmore deal made sense on paper. Their manufacturing capabilities plus her technology could create something revolutionary. But Alexandra always did her homework. She researched the family thoroughly. Richard Whitmore inherited the company from his father. Victoria came from old money, the kind that got passed down through generations without anyone actually working for it. And their son Brandon had a reputation. 3 colleges in 4 years. A drunk driving incident that mysteriously disappeared from public records. Photos of him at expensive clubs, bottles in hand. Surrounded by people who laughed at his jokes because of his last name, not because he was funny. Still, Alexandra believed in second chances. She'd needed one herself once. Maybe the family would surprise her. Maybe Brandon was just young and would grow up. She scheduled the first meeting at a 5-star restaurant downtown, neutral territory where everyone could be professional. The dinner started well enough. Richard wore an expensive suit and spoke confidently about manufacturing innovations. Victoria smiled politely, asking thoughtful questions about Alexandra's vision for the merger. Brandon showed up 20 minutes late, smelling like cologne that cost more than most people's monthly rent. He slumped in his chair, scrolling through his phone while his parents discussed business. When the waiter came to take orders, Brandon didn't look up. He just pointed at the menu and said, "Whatever's most expensive." Alexandra noticed but said nothing. She'd dealt with difficult people before. She focused on Richard and Victoria, explaining how the merger would work, what timelines looked like, which divisions would integrate first. The conversation flowed smoothly. Richard seemed impressed by her knowledge. Victoria nodded along, taking notes on her tablet. Then Brandon's phone rang. Loud music blared from the speaker, some rap song with explicit lyrics that made the elderly couple at the next table frown. He answered it right there at the table. "Yo, can't talk. I'm at some boring business dinner with my parents," he announced loudly. "Yeah, some lady they're trying to, I don't know, man. I'll hit you up later." "We're definitely going out tonight." He hung up without apologizing. Alexandra felt her jaw tighten but maintained her professional smile. His mother whispered something sharp in his ear. He rolled his eyes but pocketed the phone. The rest of the dinner limped along awkwardly. Richard tried to compensate for his son's behavior by being extra enthusiastic. Victoria kept apologizing with her eyes every time Brandon sighed dramatically or checked his watch. When dessert came, Alexandra politely declined. She had another meeting to prepare for, she explained, which was partially true. Really, she just needed air that didn't feel quite so suffocating. Over the next 3 months, Alexandra met with the Whitmores 6 more times. Each meeting revealed more cracks in the family's facade. Brandon attended exactly 2 of those meetings. At one, he fell asleep in his chair. At another, he interrupted a crucial negotiation to ask if they could wrap things up because he had concert tickets. But Richard kept assuring her that Brandon wasn't involved in company operations. He was just there to learn the business, to understand what he'd inherit someday. The actual deal didn't depend on him. Alexandra wanted to believe that. The merger would create 1,500 new jobs. It would bring cutting-edge technology to communities that desperately needed economic growth. It would secure her employees' futures and expand her company's reach. She could look past one spoiled kid if it meant all that good, couldn't she? The contract signing was scheduled for a Friday evening at the Whitmore's estate. They insisted on celebrating with a small party, just close family, friends, and key business partners. About 50 people total. Alexandra agreed reluctantly. She preferred keeping business and social events separate, but this deal was important enough to make an exception. She arrived at 6 o'clock sharp, wearing her favorite white blazer and black dress pants. The Whitmore mansion rose before her like something from a movie. Stone columns, sprawling gardens, a circular driveway where luxury cars reflected the setting sun. A butler opened the door before she could knock. Inside, crystal chandeliers lit a ballroom where guests mingled with champagne glasses. Classical music played softly from hidden speakers. Richard spotted her immediately and rushed over, hand extended. "Alexandra, so glad you made it. Tonight's the night we make history." His handshake was firm, confident. Victoria appeared beside him. Elegant in a navy gown, air-kissing near Alexandra's cheeks without actually making contact. They guided her through the crowd, introducing her to people whose names she'd forget by tomorrow. A judge, a congressman, several CEOs of companies she'd heard of. Everyone smiled politely, but Alexandra caught the looks, quick glances up and down, eyebrows slightly raised, whispers behind champagne flutes. She was used to it. Being a black woman in boardrooms meant always being underestimated, always having to prove she belonged. She'd learned to let the looks bounce off her like rain off an umbrella. The contract sat on a mahogany table near the back of the ballroom, two identical copies waiting for signatures. Richard suggested they wait until after dinner to make it official, turn the signing into a toast for all the guests to witness. Alexandra agreed. Dinner was served at 8, multiple courses, each more elaborate than the last. Alexandra sat between Richard and a banker who talked endlessly about his yacht. She smiled, nodded, and counted down the minutes until she could sign the papers and leave. Dessert had just been cleared when Brandon finally appeared. He stumbled slightly coming down the grand staircase, his tie loosened, his eyes glassy. He'd clearly been drinking, and not just wine with dinner. His mother's face went pale. His father stood quickly, moving to intercept him, but Brandon waved him off. "I'm fine, Dad. Just coming to join the party. This is still my house, right?" His words slurred slightly at the edges. He grabbed a glass of red wine from a passing waiter's tray and made his way through the crowd. People stepped aside to let him through. Alexandra watched him approach, a bad feeling growing in her stomach like storm clouds gathering on a clear day. Brandon stopped right in front of her, swaying slightly. He looked her up and down with an expression she couldn't quite read. Amusement? Contempt? Something worse? "So you're the famous Alexandra Wright," he said loudly enough that nearby conversations stopped. "The woman my parents won't shut up about. The one who's supposedly going to save our company." Alexandra stood slowly, maintaining eye contact. "I'm looking forward to working together," she said calmly, professionally, extending her hand. Brandon stared at her outstretched hand like it was something disgusting. Then he laughed, a cruel sound that made the hair on the back of her neck stand up. "Working together? Lady, I don't think you understand how this works." He took a long sip of his wine, then his eyes narrowed, and his voice dropped to something mean and cold. "People like you don't tell people like us what to do." The room went completely silent. Alexandra felt every eye turn toward them. She slowly lowered her hand, her expression neutral despite the anger rising in her chest. Richard rushed forward. "Brandon, that's enough. Go upstairs, now." But Brandon wasn't finished. He stepped closer to Alexandra, invading her space, wine sloshing in his glass. "My grandfather built this company. My father runs it. And someday I'll own it. We don't need you. We're just using your little tech business to—" He never finished the sentence. His foot caught on nothing, maybe the carpet, maybe his own drunkenness, and he lurched forward, his hand jerked upward. The wine glass tipped, and suddenly, cold red liquid was pouring down Alexandra's face, soaking into her white blazer, dripping onto the marble floor. For 3 long seconds, nobody moved. Nobody breathed. Then Brandon started laughing. And somehow, impossibly, his parents joined in. Victoria's laughter cut off first, her hand flying to her mouth as if she could stuff the sound back in. Richard's chuckle died in his throat when he saw Alexandra's face. Not angry, not embarrassed, just perfectly calm and ice-cold. The room remained frozen in horrible silence. Wine dripped from Alexandra's chin onto her ruined blazer, each drop echoing like a drumbeat in the quiet ballroom. She didn't wipe her face. She didn't move at all. She just stood there, staring at Brandon, then slowly turning her gaze to his parents. Brandon was still grinning, proud of himself, like a child who'd gotten away with stealing cookies. He didn't understand what he'd just done. He couldn't see the shift in the air, the way the entire room had turned against him in an instant, but his parents felt it. Richard's face had gone from red with embarrassment to white with fear. Victoria's smile had vanished completely, replaced by a look of dawning horror. "Alexandra, I am so incredibly sorry," Richard stammered, finally finding his voice. He grabbed napkins from the nearest table and rushed toward her, but she held up one hand to stop him. Her voice when she spoke was quiet, but everyone in the ballroom heard every single word. "Don't?" That single word carried more weight than a shouted threat. Richard froze with the napkins still in his hands. Alexandra reached up slowly and wiped the wine from her eyes with the back of her hand. She looked at the red stain on her skin, then back at Brandon, who had finally stopped laughing. Something in her expression made him take a step backward. "Do you know what I was doing 15 years ago?" Alexandra asked. Nobody answered. Brandon shifted uncomfortably. "I was working the night shift at a grocery store, scanning items for people who looked right through me like I was invisible. During my breaks, I studied coding tutorials on a laptop that crashed every 20 minutes. I wore the same 2 pairs of pants to work for 6 months because I couldn't afford new ones. My daughter ate pasta for dinner 4 nights a week because that's what we could afford." She took a breath, and her voice grew stronger. "I built my company from nothing. No inheritance, no trust fund, no daddy's business to fall back on. Just work. Every client I earned because I was better than everyone else they could have chosen. Every contract I won because I delivered results. And now I employ 10,000 people who depend on me to make smart decisions." Alexandra looked around the ballroom at all the wealthy guests who were suddenly very interested in their shoes. This deal would have created 1,500 new jobs. It would have brought innovation to 3 states. It would have secured your company's future for the next 20 years. She turned back to Richard and Victoria. "Would have." Richard went even paler. "Alexandra, please, let's go somewhere private and discuss this. My son made a terrible mistake, but we can fix this. We can fix this." Alexandra's laugh was sharp and bitter. "Your son just assaulted me in front of 50 witnesses because he thinks people like me exist to serve people like him. And you laughed. Both of you laughed." Victoria finally found her voice, shrill and desperate. "It was nervous laughter. We were shocked. We didn't know what to do." Alexandra pulled her phone from her clutch purse, wine dripping from her hands onto the screen. "You know what I'm going to do? I'm going to walk out of here. I'm going to go home and take a shower. And on Monday morning, I'm going to call my lawyers and tell them the deal is off." The words hit Richard like physical blows. His face crumpled. "You can't do that. We have a verbal agreement. We've been negotiating for months. Our investors are counting on this. Our employees are counting on this." "Then maybe you should have raised your son to respect people," Alexandra said simply. She turned toward the door. Richard grabbed her arm, gently, desperately, and she looked down at his hand until he released her. "Please," he whispered. "Brandon will apologize. We'll make this right. Name your terms. Anything you want." Alexandra considered him for a long moment. Around the ballroom, guests whispered frantically. A few were already typing on their phones, probably texting reporters or business partners. This story would be everywhere by morning. Finally, she spoke. You want to make this right? Here's my terms. Brandon joins your company starting Monday, not as an executive, not in some fake position where he pretends to work. He starts at the bottom. Warehouse floor, minimum wage. He works 40 hours a week for 6 months. If he can prove to me, that he understands what it means to actually earn something, then maybe we can revisit this conversation. The suggestion landed like a bomb. Brandon's mouth fell open. You've got to be kidding. I'm not working in some dirty warehouse. Do you know who I am? Alexandra turned to look at him directly for the first time since the wine incident. I know exactly who you are. You're someone who's never been told no in his entire life. Someone who thinks money and a last name make you better than everyone else. Someone who needs to learn that actions have consequences. She looked back at Richard. Those are my terms. Take them or leave them. You have until Monday morning to decide. If Brandon shows up at Wright Technologies' main warehouse at 6 a.m. Monday, we'll proceed with negotiations. If he doesn't, the deal is dead forever. Richard opened his mouth, then closed it. He looked at his son, then at his wife. Victoria was crying now, mascara running down her cheeks. 6 a.m. Monday, Alexandra repeated. Warehouse address is on our website. Tell him to bring steel-toed boots and a willingness to actually work for once in his life. She walked toward the door, her heels clicking on marble. The crowd parted like water. Nobody tried to stop her. The butler opened the door without being asked, his face carefully neutral, but his eyes showing respect. Alexandra stepped out into the cool night air, leaving behind a ballroom full of shocked silence and one family whose entire future had just crumbled in less than 10 minutes. She didn't look back. The drive home took 30 minutes. Alexandra kept both hands steady on the wheel, even though they wanted to shake. The wine had dried sticky and uncomfortable on her skin. Her blazer was ruined, probably beyond saving. But she'd meant every word she said back there. Some things were more important than money. Some lessons needed to be taught, even if it cost her a massive deal. When she pulled into her driveway, the house was dark, except for one light in the upstairs window. Her daughter was still awake, probably reading or watching videos on her tablet. Alexandra sat in the car for a moment, letting the engine tick as it cooled, processing everything that had just happened. Her phone had been buzzing constantly during the drive, texts, emails, calls from numbers she didn't recognize. News traveled fast in business circles. By morning, every tech blog and business journal would have some version of tonight's story. Some would paint her as unreasonable. Some would call her a hero. Most would probably get the details wrong. She didn't care. She'd made her choice. Inside, she kicked off her heels and climbed the stairs. Her daughter's door was cracked open, light spilling into the hallway. Alexandra knocked gently. Mom? 15-year-old Jessica sat up in bed, tablet in lap, her eyes widening when she saw her mother's wine-stained clothes. Oh my God, what happened? Are you okay? Alexandra smiled, really smiled, for the first time all evening. I'm fine, baby. Just had an interesting night. We'll talk about it tomorrow. She kissed Jessica's forehead, breathing in the familiar smell of her daughter's strawberry shampoo. This was what mattered. This was why she'd built everything she had. So Jessica would never have to work 2 jobs, never have to choose between dinner and new clothes, never have to make herself small to fit into spaces that didn't want her. Love you, Mom, Jessica said, already settling back into her pillows. Love you more, Alexandra replied, the same response she'd given every night for 15 years. The hot shower felt like washing away more than just wine. Alexandra stood under the spray until the water ran clear, until her skin was pink from heat, until some of the tension left her shoulders. She'd gambled everything tonight on principle. If Brandon showed up Monday morning, maybe there was hope. Maybe people could change. Maybe she could build something good with the Whitmore family after all. But if he didn't show up, she'd just walked away from $650 million and told one of the most connected families in the state exactly what she thought of them. Her investors would be furious. Her board of directors would demand explanations. Some people would call her emotional, Irrational, too sensitive, let them talk. She'd faced worse and survived. Alexandra dried off, put on comfortable pajamas, and climbed into bed. Sleep came surprisingly easily. She'd made her choice, and she'd stand by it, whatever came next. Monday morning arrived with gray skies and the threat of rain. Alexandra woke at 5 a.m. like always, went for her usual run, showered, and dressed in her standard work uniform. Blazer, pressed pants, low heels. She made coffee, reviewed her schedule, and tried not to think about whether Brandon Whitmore would actually show up at the warehouse. At 5:45, her phone rang. The warehouse manager. Her stomach dropped. "He's here," the manager said, and Alexandra could hear the surprise in his voice. "Brandon Whitmore just walked through the door. 15 minutes early, actually. He's wearing jeans and boots, like you said. Looks scared out of his mind, but he's here." Alexandra sat down slowly in her kitchen chair. "Keep an eye on him. Standard new employee orientation. Don't give him any special treatment. I want hourly updates on how he's doing." She hung up and stared at her coffee cup. He'd actually shown up. Part of her was impressed. Part of her was suspicious. Rich kids didn't just suddenly develop work ethics overnight. This was probably his parents forcing him, threatening to cut him off financially if he didn't comply. Still, he was there. That was something. The next call came from Richard Whitmore himself. "Thank you," he said, and his voice sounded rough, like he hadn't slept. "Thank you for giving him this chance. For giving us this chance. I know we don't deserve it after what happened, but I swear to you, we're going to make this right." Alexandra listened to his promises, his assurances that things would be different, that they understood now what they'd almost lost. She made non-committal sounds, promising nothing, agreeing to nothing. 6 months. Brandon had 6 months to prove himself. After that, they'd see. The first week was brutal for Brandon, according to the reports Alexandra received. He showed up on time every day, which apparently shocked everyone, including himself. The work was physical, loading trucks, moving inventory, operating forklifts under supervision. The other warehouse workers didn't know who he was at first. They just saw another new guy who didn't know which end of a pallet jack to push. Brandon got blisters on his hands. He pulled a muscle in his back. He came home, well, to a modest apartment his parents rented for him near the warehouse, not the mansion. Exhausted and sore every single night. No parties, no clubs, no expensive dinners. Just work, sleep, repeat. The other employees started teaching him things. How to lift properly so he wouldn't hurt himself. Shortcuts for organizing inventory. The best place to get lunch nearby that didn't cost $15. They shared their stories during breaks. Single parents working 2 jobs. College students paying their own tuition. Immigrants sending money back to family in other countries. People working hard every day just to survive, much less get ahead. Week 2, something shifted. Brandon started asking questions about the other workers' lives. Real questions, not polite small talk. He listened when a grandmother talked about raising her grandson because her daughter was in prison. He paid attention when a young guy explained how he was saving every penny to open his own business someday. He began to understand, slowly, that these people were just as smart as him, just as valuable as him. They'd just never had the advantages he'd been born with. Alexandra watched all this through the manager's reports, cautiously optimistic but still guarded. Actions were easy to fake for a few weeks. Real change took time. Meanwhile, the business world was watching. Articles appeared in trade magazines about the incident at the Whitmore estate. Most praised Alexandra for her stance. A few called her vindictive. The Whitmore Company's stock had dropped 12% the Monday after the party. Investors were nervous. Without the Right Technologies merger, the future looked uncertain. Month 2 brought the first real test. A massive shipment came in late on a Friday afternoon. The warehouse needed to be unloaded before the weekend or the inventory would miss critical Monday deliveries. Everyone was asked to stay late, overtime pay, pizza provided, but still it meant working until midnight. Brandon didn't hesitate. He stayed. He worked alongside everyone else, moving boxes, scanning labels, doing whatever needed to be done. Around 9 p.m., one of the older workers, a man named Robert, who'd been with the company for 20 years, pulled something in his shoulder. Brandon immediately helped him sit down, got him ice, and insisted he go home early. "I've got this," Brandon told him. "You've taught me enough. I can handle your section." Robert looked skeptical, but his shoulder was killing him. He left. Brandon took over his station and worked until 1 a.m. instead of midnight, making sure everything was done right. That was the moment Alexandra started to believe real change might be possible. The manager's report the next Monday included a detail that made Alexandra smile despite herself. Brandon had come in on Saturday, his day off, to check that Friday night's shipment had been properly logged. He hadn't been asked to do it. He hadn't been paid for it. He just wanted to make sure the team's hard work hadn't been wasted because of some computer error. That was initiative. That was caring about the work itself, not just punching a clock. Month 3 arrived with spring weather and new challenges. The warehouse implemented a new inventory system, which meant everyone needed training on unfamiliar software. The older workers struggled with the technology. They'd been doing things the same way for decades. Suddenly, everything was tablets and scanning codes and digital confirmations. Frustration levels were high. People made mistakes. Shipments got delayed. Tempers flared. Brandon surprised everyone by becoming the unofficial tech support. He'd grown up with computers and phones and tablets. The technology that intimidated the older workers was second nature to him. He stayed late to help people practice with the new system. He created simple instruction sheets with pictures showing each step. He never made anyone feel stupid for not understanding. "You should see it," the warehouse manager told Alexandra during one of their weekly check-ins. "The grandmother who could barely figure out her flip phone last month is now scanning inventory like she's been doing it her whole life, thanks to Brandon. He spent 3 hours after his shift last Tuesday just working with her until she got it." Alexandra filed that information away, impressed but still cautious. 3 months was progress, but it wasn't 6 months. People could be on their best behavior for 3 months if they knew they were being watched. The real test would come when the novelty wore off, when the work became boring routine instead of a redemption project. She decided it was time to visit the warehouse herself. Not an announced inspection, just a casual visit to see how things really operated when people didn't know the CEO was watching. She arranged it for a random Thursday afternoon, telling only the security desk she'd be coming by. When she arrived, the warehouse was busy with afternoon operations. Forklifts moved between rows of shelving. Workers shouted updates to each other over the noise of machinery. The organized chaos of a functioning warehouse in full swing. Alexandra stood by the entrance for a few minutes, just observing. Nobody noticed her at first. Then she spotted Brandon across the floor, talking with 2 other workers near a stack of pallets. He was explaining something, pointing at a tablet screen, the other 2 nodding along. He looked different from the drunk kid who'd poured wine on her 4 months ago. Thinner, more muscular from the physical work. His clothes were practical, not expensive. His hair was shorter, simpler. But the biggest change was in his face. The arrogant sneer was gone, replaced by something more open, more genuine. Alexandra walked toward them, and one of the workers noticed her first. His eyes went wide. "Ms. Wright!" The warehouse suddenly got quieter as people realized the CEO was there. Brandon turned, and for just a second, fear flashed across his face. Then he straightened his shoulders and met her eyes. "Ms. Wright," he said, his voice steady despite the obvious nervousness. "Welcome to the warehouse. Is there something I can help you with?" Professional. Respectful. No trace of the entitlement from before. Alexandra nodded slightly. "Just doing a walkthrough. Don't let me interrupt your work." She moved past them, touring the facility, stopping to talk with various workers. Everyone had good things to say about the operation. A few mentioned Brandon specifically, praising how he'd helped them with the new computer system, or covered a shift when someone's kid was sick. After 30 minutes, Alexandra made her way back to where Brandon was working. He was alone now, double-checking shipping labels against a manifest on his tablet. He looked up when she approached. "Can I talk to you for a minute?" Alexandra asked. Brandon set down the tablet immediately. "Of course." They walked to a quieter corner of the warehouse, away from the noise and activity. Alexandra studied him for a moment. He looked back at her without flinching, but she could see his hands were shaking slightly. He was terrified, she realized. Terrified she was here to tell him he'd failed, that the deal was off, that everything he'd worked for these past 4 months meant nothing. "You've done well here," Alexandra said finally. Brandon's shoulders sagged with relief. "Thank you. I've tried really hard to—" She held up a hand, cutting him off. "Let me finish. You've done well, but we're only 4 months in. You have 2 more months to go. I need to know this isn't just an act. I need to know that when this is over, when the deal is signed and you go back to your real life, you won't forget everything you learned here." Brandon was quiet for a long moment, choosing his words carefully. "I can't go back to who I was before. I see that now. These people—" He gestured at the warehouse around them. "They work harder than I ever did, and they have so much less to show for it. That's not fair. That's not right. And I was part of the problem. I looked down on people like them my whole life without even realizing it." His voice grew more passionate, more urgent. "My parents gave me everything, and I thought that made me special. But I didn't earn any of it. These people earn every dollar they make, and I respect that more than anything my family owns." Alexandra watched him carefully, looking for signs of manipulation or performance. She saw none. His eyes were honest. His voice carried conviction. He believed what he was saying. But believing it and living it long-term were different things. 2 more months, she repeated. "Show me this is real. Show me you can sustain this when it stops being a punishment and starts being a choice." Brandon nodded. "I will. I promise." Alexandra turned to leave, then paused. "And Brandon, your father calls me every week asking about the deal, wanting updates, wanting reassurance. Tell him to stop. If you complete your 6 months successfully, we'll talk about next steps, but I won't be pressured or rushed." She walked away, leaving Brandon standing alone in the warehouse. As she drove back to her office, Alexandra felt something she hadn't felt in months. Hope. Real, genuine hope that maybe this family could change. That maybe something good could still come from that horrible night. The next few weeks passed uneventfully. Brandon continued working, learning, growing. The warehouse team had fully accepted him as one of their own. Then came week 18, and everything exploded again. A reporter showed up at the warehouse asking questions, trying to get interviews with workers about the heir doing penance. Someone had leaked the story, probably tipped off by someone at the party 4 months ago. The article hit online that evening with the headline, "Billionaire's Son Forced to Work Warehouse Job After Racist Incident." The internet erupted, social media flooded with opinions. Half the country praised Alexandra for holding Brandon accountable. The other half accused her of exploitation and performative social justice. Death threats appeared in her email. Support messages crashed her company's website. The story went viral in less than 24 hours, and suddenly everyone had an opinion about something they hadn't witnessed and didn't fully understand. Alexandra's phone rang constantly. Reporters, investors, board members, all demanding statements or explanations or damage control. The peaceful resolution she'd been working toward for 4 months was suddenly a national controversy, and someone with very bad timing had just lit the fuse on a bomb that could destroy everything. Alexandra's office became a war room within hours of the story breaking. Her PR team gathered around the conference table, laptops open, phones buzzing with notifications that wouldn't stop. The article had been shared 400,000 times in 6 hours. Cable news networks were running segments about it. People who'd never heard of Wright Technologies or the Whitmore family suddenly had strong opinions about what had happened. The worst part was how wrong most of the coverage was. The headline screamed racism, but the reporter had twisted the facts. The article made it sound like Alexandra had demanded Brandon work as some kind of revenge scheme, completely ignoring that he'd assaulted her first, that his parents had left, that she'd offered them a path forward when she could have just walked away forever. Context didn't matter to the internet. Nuance didn't trend on social media. People saw rich white kid and black CEO and forced labor and filled in their own narrative. "We need to get ahead of this," her communications director said, typing frantically. "Statement from you, statement from the Whitmore family, maybe even a joint press conference showing unity and—" Alexandra cut her off. "No statements. Not yet. Let me think." She walked to her office window, looking down at the city 47 floors below. Somewhere out there, Brandon was probably seeing the same headlines, reading the same hateful comments. Some people were calling him a hero for humbling himself. Others were calling him a victim of reverse racism. Still others were saying the whole thing was a publicity stunt. Nobody seemed to care about the truth, that a young man was genuinely trying to change, that real growth was happening, that this wasn't about punishment but about learning empathy. Her phone buzzed. A text from the warehouse manager. "Brandon's here. Reporter's outside. He came in through the back entrance, still working his shift. Thought you should know." Alexandra felt something tighten in her chest. The easy thing would be to quit, to hide, to let his parents' lawyers handle the media firestorm. But he'd shown up anyway. That meant something. Another text came through, this time from an unknown number. She almost deleted it, but something made her open it. "Miss Wright, this is Brandon. I'm so sorry. I don't know who leaked this or why now. I never wanted any of this to become public. I know this is hurting your company and your reputation. If you want me to quit, I understand. If you want to cancel the deal, I understand that too. I just want you to know that these past 4 months have been the most important of my life, and I'm grateful for the chance you gave me, even if it ends like this. I'm sorry for everything." Alexandra read the message 3 times. The kid had nothing to apologize for this time. He hadn't leaked the story. He was as much a victim of the media circus as she was. She typed back quickly. "Don't quit. Don't talk to reporters. Keep your head down and finish your shift. We'll figure this out." She turned back to her PR team. "Schedule a press conference for tomorrow morning. Just me. No Whitmores, no prepared statement, no lawyer-approved talking points. I'm going to tell people exactly what happened and why, and they can make up their own minds based on facts instead of clickbait headlines." Her communications director looked horrified. "That's incredibly risky. Without a prepared statement, you could say something that makes this worse. The legal team needs to vet every word before—" Alexandra shook her head firmly. "No scripts. People are tired of corporate PR responses that say nothing. They want authenticity. I'll give them authenticity." She spent the rest of the evening preparing mentally, not writing a speech but organizing her thoughts, remembering every detail of that night 4 months ago, every conversation with Brandon since then, every reason she'd made the choices she made. The next morning, she wore the same style white blazer she'd worn to the Whitmore party, a deliberate choice. The press conference was scheduled for 10 a.m. in the main conference room of Wright Technologies. 50 reporters packed into a space meant for 30. Cameras lined the back wall. Phones were raised to record every word. The energy in the room felt hostile, like sharks sensing blood in the water. Alexandra walked to the podium without notes, without water, without anything to hide behind. She looked directly into the cameras and began speaking. "4 months ago, I went to the Whitmore estate to sign a business deal worth $650 million. I left with wine poured on my face and my white blazer ruined. You've all seen the headlines now, but let me tell you what actually happened." She described the dinner, Brandon's behavior, the moment the wine fell, his parents' laughter. She didn't sugarcoat it. She didn't soften the details to make anyone comfortable. She told the truth plainly, clearly, letting people understand the humiliation and the choice she'd faced in that moment. "I could have sued," Alexandra continued. "I could have destroyed that family with legal action and public shaming. Instead, I offered them a chance to make it right, not through money or apologies, but through action. I asked Brandon to work at my warehouse for 6 months at minimum wage to understand what real work looks like, what respect means, what he'd taken for granted his entire life." The reporters were silent now, actually listening instead of preparing their next gotcha question. Alexandra's voice grew stronger. "Some of you are calling this exploitation. Some are saying I forced a rich kid into slave labor. Let me be crystal clear. Brandon could have said no. His family could have walked away. Nobody forced him to show up at 6 a.m. every Monday through Friday for the past 4 months. He chose to be there. And you want to know something? He's been excellent. He's learned. He's grown. He's become someone his co-workers respect, not because of his last name, but because of his character." She paused, letting that sink in. "But now we have a problem. Someone leaked this story, and instead of celebrating a young man's genuine effort to become better, We've turned it into a circus. We've made it about race and revenge and corporate drama instead of what it actually is, a story about accountability, growth, and second chances. A reporter in the front row raised her hand. Ms. Wright, critics are saying you're using Brandon as cheap labor, that you're profiting from his family's desperation. Alexandra interrupted smoothly. Brandon makes the same wage as every other warehouse employee at his level. Not a penny less. Every hour he works is logged, taxed, and paid according to federal labor law. And here's something nobody's mentioned. Every paycheck he's earned, he's donated to a scholarship fund for children of warehouse workers. He didn't have to do that. I didn't ask him to. He chose to because he started caring about the people he works with. That detail hadn't been public before. Alexandra watched it ripple through the room, reporters typing frantically. Another hand shot up. What about the Whitmore family? Are they angry about this arrangement? Are they claiming you're taking advantage? Alexandra smiled tightly. The Whitmores can speak for themselves, but I'll say this. They understood what their son needed. They've supported this process even when it was uncomfortable, even when it meant watching their heir scrub floors and load trucks. That takes courage. A male reporter near the back shouted out, "Do you really expect us to believe a spoiled rich kid suddenly became a good person just because he worked a warehouse job for a few months? This sounds like a PR stunt." Alexandra's eyes hardened. I don't care what you believe. I care about what's true. And the truth is that people can change if they're willing to do the work. Brandon was raised in a bubble of privilege that taught him some people matter more than others. These 4 months popped that bubble. He's seen reality. He's lived it. And he's genuinely tried to be better. If you can't accept that people are capable of growth, that says more about you than it does about him. The reporters erupted with more questions, hands waving, voices overlapping. Alexandra pointed to a young woman off to the side who'd been quiet the whole time. You. Last question. The woman stood nervously. Ms. Wright, what happens now? Does Brandon finish his 6 months? Does the deal go through? Or has this media attention ruined everything you were trying to build? Alexandra took a deep breath. Brandon has 2 months left. If he completes them with the same dedication he's shown so far, then yes, I'll move forward with merger negotiations. Not because his family needs it, though they do. Not because the money is good, though it is. But because I believe in giving people the chance to prove themselves, and he's earned that chance. She stepped back from the podium. Thank you all for coming. That's all I have to say. Security helped her exit through a side door as reporters shouted more questions. Her phone was already blowing up with reactions. Her PR team looked shell-shocked. But Alexandra felt oddly calm. She'd told the truth. Whatever happened next was out of her hands. That afternoon, Richard Whitmore called. Thank you, he said simply, for what you said at the press conference, for defending Brandon, for believing in him when most people wouldn't. Alexandra leaned back in her office chair. I didn't defend him for you. I defended him because it was true. He's doing the work. That deserves recognition. Richard was quiet for a moment. Victoria and I have been talking. We realize now how badly we failed as parents. We gave Brandon everything except the tools to be a good person. We thought money and connections were enough. We were wrong. His voice cracked slightly. Watching him these past 4 months has been humbling. He comes home exhausted every night, but he's happy. Really happy. He talks about the people he works with like they're friends, not employees or servants. He's excited about work. Our son has never been excited about anything in his life except parties and sports cars. Alexandra heard the genuine emotion in Richard's voice and felt some of her guardedness soften. People respond to being treated like they matter. Brandon's learning that lesson the hard way, but he's learning it. They talked for another 10 minutes before hanging up. Alexandra stared at her phone afterward, processing everything. The media storm would rage for a few more days, then move on to the next controversy. But the work would continue. Brandon would show up tomorrow and the next day and the day after that. And in 2 months, they'd see if all of this had been worth it. The following week brought unexpected support from surprising sources. Other CEOs reached out privately, praising Alexandra's handling of the situation. Several wrote op-eds defending her approach. A major business magazine ran a cover story titled "The New Face of Corporate Accountability," featuring Alexandra's photo. Public opinion was shifting. The initial outrage was fading as people learned more details, saw through the sensationalized headlines, understood the fuller context. Brandon's co-workers started speaking to friendly reporters too, sharing stories about how he'd changed, how he'd helped them, how he'd become a valued member of their team. One interview with Robert, the older worker whose shoulder Brandon had helped when he got injured, went particularly viral. "That kid could have been anywhere else," Robert said directly to the camera. "Could have been at some mansion drinking expensive wine. Instead, he stayed until 1 in the morning making sure our work was done right. That's character. That's somebody I'd trust." Month 5 began with a new challenge. The warehouse was selected for a major efficiency audit by corporate headquarters. This happened every few years. Outside consultants would come in, analyze every process, and recommend changes to improve productivity and reduce costs. It usually meant layoffs. The warehouse workers knew this. They'd been through it before. The tension was thick as consultants in expensive suits walked the floor with clipboards, timing how long tasks took, measuring output per hour, calculating cost per unit shipped. Workers who'd been there for decades worried their experience wouldn't matter if some algorithm decided they were too slow or too expensive. Brandon noticed the change in atmosphere immediately. During lunch break, he sat with a group of workers who were discussing the audit in worried whispers. "They're going to cut the older employees," one woman said bitterly. "They always do. We can't move as fast as the young kids, so they'll replace us with people who'll work for less." Brandon listened to their fears, seeing genuine terror in faces he'd come to know well over the past 5 months. These weren't abstract employees or numbers on a spreadsheet. They were Maria, who sent money to her sick mother in Honduras. They were James, who was saving for his daughter's wedding. They were Patricia, who'd worked here for 18 years and had nothing else lined up if she lost this job. That evening, Brandon did something he hadn't done in months. He called his father. "Dad, I need your help with something." Richard sounded surprised. Brandon rarely called asking for anything anymore. "Of course, son. What do you need?" Brandon explained the situation, the audit, the worried workers, the likelihood of layoffs to improve efficiency numbers. "I know I'm not supposed to use family connections or money or whatever, but these people are going to lose their jobs. People who've worked hard for years. People who've helped me learn everything I know about actual work. There has to be something we can do." Richard was quiet, thinking. The audit is about efficiency. The problem is that warehouse operations are expensive relative to output. But what if the output increased? What if the warehouse became more valuable to the company? Brandon frowned. "How would we do that?" His father's voice took on the tone of a man who'd been solving business problems for 3 decades. "Right Technologies is expanding into 3 new states next quarter. They'll need distribution centers. What if your warehouse becomes a regional hub? More responsibility, more strategic importance, more value to the company. Harder to justify cutting staff from a facility that's critical to expansion plans." Brandon felt hope spark. "Could you arrange that? Could you talk to the people who make those decisions?" Richard chuckled softly. "Son, we're in the middle of merger negotiations. I talk to those people every week. Let me see what I can do." 2 days later, Alexandra received a proposal from the Whitmore team. It was brilliant, actually. A restructuring plan that would turn the warehouse Brandon worked at into a regional distribution hub, requiring additional staff rather than cuts, positioning it as essential infrastructure for the company's expansion strategy. The consultants would have nothing to cut because the facility's importance would outweigh any minor efficiency gains from layoffs. Alexandra read through the proposal twice, impressed by the strategic thinking. Then she called Richard. "This is good work, really good. But I'm curious why you developed it now, right in the middle of an efficiency audit." Richard didn't hesitate. "Brandon called me. He was worried about his coworkers. He asked if there was anything we could do to protect their jobs. I told him business isn't about protection, it's about creating value. So we created value." Alexandra felt something warm settle in her chest. "He called you to help his coworkers." Richard's voice was thick with pride. 5 months ago, my son wouldn't have noticed if every person in that warehouse got fired. Now he's calling in favors to save their jobs. You did that. This experience did that. Alexandra looked at the proposal again, seeing it in a new light. I'll review this with my team. If the numbers work, and I think they will, we'll implement it. The warehouse becomes a hub, nobody gets laid off, and we accelerate the expansion timeline. She paused. But Richard, this doesn't change Brandon's remaining time. He still finishes his full 6 months. No shortcuts. Richard laughed. I wouldn't dream of it. He's exactly where he needs to be. The proposal was approved. The consultants were redirected to focus on expansion logistics instead of cost cutting. The warehouse workers learned their jobs were safe, and more than safe. They were about to become part of something bigger. Brandon became something of a hero among his co-workers when word spread that he'd been involved in saving their jobs. He was embarrassed by the attention, insisting he'd just made a phone call, that his father did the real work. But the other workers understood what it meant. He'd used his privilege for good instead of ignoring their problems or considering himself above their struggles. Week 22 brought another unexpected development. A television producer reached out to Alexandra requesting an interview for a documentary about workplace culture and second chances. She almost said no automatically, tired of media attention, but something about the pitch made her reconsider. This wasn't a hit piece or exploitation. The producer wanted to tell the full story, before, during, and after, showing the real process of someone learning to be better. Alexandra agreed on one condition. Brandon had to agree too, and he couldn't be pressured into it. The producer reached out to Brandon, who initially refused. He didn't want more attention, didn't want to seem like he was showing off his redemption arc, but Alexandra called him directly. This isn't about you looking good, she told him over the phone. It's about showing other people that change is possible. How many other rich kids are out there right now, making the same mistakes you made? How many families are enabling behavior they shouldn't? Your story could actually help people. Brandon was quiet for a long time. What if I mess it up? What if I say something stupid and prove everyone right who said this was all fake? Alexandra's voice was gentle but firm. Then you'll learn from that too. Growth isn't a straight line, Brandon. It's messy and complicated, and sometimes you fall backward. But you keep trying. That's the point. He agreed to the interview. The filming happened over 2 weeks. Cameras following Brandon at the warehouse, interviewing his co-workers, capturing the daily reality of his life now versus what it had been. The producers also interviewed Alexandra, Richard, Victoria, and several warehouse employees. The documentary was scheduled to air in 3 months, right around the time Brandon's 6 months would be complete. Everything was building towards something. Alexandra could feel it. The story that had started with wine on her face and laughter in a ballroom was becoming something bigger than any of them had expected. It wasn't just about one family or one deal anymore. It had become a conversation about privilege, accountability, empathy, and whether people could truly change. Week 24 arrived, marking the end of Brandon's 6 months. His final shift fell on a Friday, and word had spread throughout the company. Alexandra decided to visit the warehouse one last time, unannounced, just to see how things concluded naturally. She arrived at 4 p.m., 2 hours before Brandon's shift would end. The warehouse was busy as always, but there was a different energy in the air, anticipation maybe, or the feeling that something significant was ending. She found Brandon training a new employee on the forklift, patient and thorough, making sure the younger kid understood safety procedures before letting him try on his own. When the training was done, Brandon turned and saw Alexandra watching. He walked over, wiping his hands on his work pants. Mrs. Wright, I didn't know you were coming by. Alexandra smiled slightly. I wanted to see your last day. How are you feeling? Brandon looked around the warehouse, at the people he'd worked alongside for 6 months, and Alexandra saw genuine emotion in his eyes. Sad, actually. I thought I'd be relieved when this was over. Thought I'd be excited to get back to my real life. But this has been my real life. These people are my friends. This work matters to me. He turned back to her, and his voice was serious. I know I completed the 6 months. I know that was the deal. but I don't want to just disappear from here. Is there a way I could stay involved? Maybe come back once a week to help with training or special projects or something? I don't want to lose this connection. Alexandra hadn't expected that. She'd prepared for many possible reactions: relief, celebration, even resentment, but not a genuine desire to continue working. "We can arrange something," she said carefully. "But Brandon, you understand that once the merger goes through, you'll have responsibilities in the company, executive responsibilities. You can't be in the warehouse full-time." Brandon nodded. "I know. But I also know that I never want to become the person I was before. The person who didn't see these workers as real people. If I'm going to help run a company someday, I need to remember where everything actually comes from. People like this, doing work like this, making it all possible." At 5:30, the shift supervisor called everyone together for a quick meeting. This wasn't unusual. End-of-week updates, safety reminders, schedule changes for the following week. But today was different. The supervisor, a woman named Jennifer who'd been with the company for 15 years, spoke directly to Brandon. "We all know today's your last official day with us. We wanted to do something to mark the occasion." She pulled out a warehouse uniform shirt, the same kind everyone wore, with Right Technologies embroidered on the chest. But this one had Brandon's name stitched above the pocket. "We had this made for you. Figured if you're going to keep coming back like you said, you should have your own shirt instead of borrowing spares." The warehouse erupted in applause. Brandon took the shirt, clearly fighting back tears, and managed a shaky, "Thank you." Then Robert, the older worker Brandon had helped months ago, stepped forward. "You came here as punishment. You leave as family. That's all we wanted to say." Brandon completely lost his composure then, tears running freely down his face as co-workers hugged him, clapped him on the back, and thanked him for being a good teammate. Alexandra watched from the side, her own eyes damp, realizing that something truly special had happened here. This wasn't just one person changing. It was an entire community embracing someone they had every reason to reject, choosing kindness over judgment, hope over cynicism. After the impromptu celebration ended and workers returned to finishing their shifts, Brandon approached Alexandra one more time. "What happens now? With the deal, I mean." Alexandra considered him carefully. "Monday morning, you and I meet with my executive team. We discuss the merger terms in detail. If we can agree on structure, timeline, and culture integration, and that last part is crucial, then we move forward. Your 6 months proved you can change. Now you have to prove that change can last and scale beyond just you." Brandon nodded seriously. "I understand. And Ms. Wright? Thank you for everything. For not just walking away that night. For giving me a chance I didn't deserve. For believing I could be better." Alexandra extended her hand formally. Brandon shook it, his grip firm and respectful. "Don't thank me yet," Alexandra said with a slight smile. "The real work starts Monday. Running a company is harder than loading trucks." Brandon smiled back. "Good, I'm ready for hard." As Alexandra drove home that evening, her phone buzzed with a news alert. The documentary about Brandon's journey had just released its first trailer online. She pulled it up at a red light, watching 30 seconds of footage. Brandon at the warehouse, her press conference, interviews with workers, images of that night at the Whitmore estate. The final text on screen read, "Can privilege learn empathy? Can accountability create change?" The answer might surprise you. The trailer had already been viewed 2 million times in 3 hours. Comments poured in, thousands per minute, debating everything from corporate responsibility to personal redemption. Alexandra closed her phone as the light turned green. Let them debate. She knew the truth. She'd watched it happen firsthand. The question wasn't whether people could change. Brandon had proven they could. The real question was whether the world would let them, whether society would accept transformation or always demand people remain who they'd been at their worst. Monday would bring answers to some of those questions. The merger negotiations would test everything Brandon had learned. But for tonight, Alexandra let herself feel something she rarely allowed: optimism. Genuine, earned optimism that sometimes when people were willing to do the hard work, things could actually get better. She pulled into her driveway, where lights glowed warm in the windows, and her daughter was probably waiting to hear about her day. This was what mattered, Alexandra reminded herself. Building something good, creating opportunities for people to grow, using power to lift others up instead of keeping them down. The Whitmore deal would be the biggest merger of her career if it went through, but it would also be the most meaningful, because it represented something larger than money or market share. It represented the possibility of change, the value of second chances, and the radical idea that accountability and empathy could coexist in the business world. But as Alexandra walked toward her front door, her phone buzzed one more time with a message that would change everything again. The message was from an unknown number, but the attached image made Alexandra's blood run cold. It was a photograph from the Whitmore party, taken moments before Brandon poured the wine. But this angle was different from what she remembered. In this photo, Brandon's face was clearly visible, his expression sharp and focused, not drunk and stumbling. His hand was positioned deliberately, tilting the glass with obvious intention. This wasn't an accident caused by intoxication. This was calculated. The text below the image read, "Thought you should see what really happened before you sign away your company to people who plan to humiliate you. More evidence coming Monday morning. A concerned friend." Alexandra stood frozen on her front porch, staring at her phone screen as the warm light from her house spilled out around her. Her mind raced through the past 6 months, replaying every conversation with Brandon, every report from the warehouse, every moment she'd convinced herself that real change was happening. Had it all been an elaborate act? Had she been played by a family desperate to save their failing company? She forwarded the image to her head of security with a simple message. "Find out who sent this and verify if the photo has been altered. I need answers by tomorrow morning." Inside, Jessica called out, "Mom? That you?" Alexandra forced her voice to sound normal. "Yeah, baby, just checking some work emails. Be right there." She couldn't let her daughter see her rattled. Couldn't let anyone see her doubt until she had facts. But doubt was there now, spreading like poison through all the certainty she'd built over 6 months. That night, sleep came in scattered fragments, interrupted by questions that wouldn't stop. If Brandon had deliberately humiliated her, why work so hard at the warehouse? Why donate his paychecks? Why call his father to save his co-workers' jobs? None of it made sense if the whole thing was a setup from the beginning, unless he was exactly as good at manipulation as he'd once been at entitlement. By 6 a.m. Saturday, Alexandra gave up on sleep. She made coffee and opened her laptop, pulling up every piece of documentation from the past 6 months. Performance reviews from the warehouse manager, timesheets showing Brandon's hours, interviews with co-workers, the proposal Richard had submitted about the regional hub. She read it all again with new eyes, looking for inconsistencies, searching for proof either way. Her security chief called at 8 a.m.,